Welcome to another edition of Business Today, where we discuss in depth the business world and its dealings. In today's show, we have a very interesting segment planned for you. We're going to be talking about the be-all and end-all of investment. It is a type of investment that has been around since the beginning of time. It is a type of business that has been around since the beginning of time as well. This is about real estate. We're going to be talking about this with a very professional, very knowledgeable industry insider. We're going to be talking to the head of property group at John Keells Holdings. We'll learn a little bit about him before we have a chat.
Mr.Nayana Mawilmada is the sector head of the property group at John Keells Holdings. With extensive international experience in planning, facilitating and managing large-scale urban development and infrastructure projects across 15 countries and working within both the private and public domains, Mr. Nayana brings a unique perspective to Sri Lanka's real estate sector. He is widely seen as a key advocate and spokesman for sound urban development policy and planning in the country. His academic training includes an MBA from the Harvard Business School, a Master of City Planning from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and a Bachelor of Architecture from Hampton University in the USA. In recognition of his leadership in Sri Lanka's urban development space, he was awarded an Eisenhower Fellowship in 2017.
And Mr. Nayana Mawilmada is in the studio with us. Great to have you on. Thanks
Nice
for being
to meet
here.
you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, Mr. Mawilmada, I think to start off, it's good to get an overview of the housing market or the real estate sector in Sri Lanka. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think it's an interesting time to really think about real estate, obviously, given what's going on in Sri Lanka at the moment, interest rates being where they are. I think a lot of people are starting to think about, okay, does real estate make sense for me? And as you said at the beginning, basically, at some level, everybody partakes in the real estate market because everybody lives in most people at least live in a house unless you live on the street. So I think if you look at the landscape across Sri Lanka, it really varies quite widely from whether you're in the heart of Colombo, in the suburbs of Colombo, or in the kind of provincial cities, right? So I think maybe we can just kind of break it down a little bit, if you don't mind. So if you look at the Western Province, we have that's obviously the densest part of the city, of the country, and the largest hub of employment as well, right? And it's also the biggest population consolidation. But when you look at Western Province, there's very, very different nodes within it. The center of Colombo, which we would maybe say CMC and just the immediate surrounds of it, is extremely dense, and you can see that physically transforming. And then as you go further and further out, it just gets flatter and flatter and spreads out throughout the country. So I think it's very difficult to say, look, this is one thing about real estate, but maybe we can just try to dissect it and look at different aspects of it as we go on.
And now, looking at this industry insider, where do you see the interest lying from investors in different types of real estate?
Again, it depends, right? It depends if people are looking at real estate to own a home or real estate as an investment, right? And if we can just focus on the Western Province or Colombo just to make it a little easier, you see a lot of people looking, if you look at Colombo's real estate market, we have about 10% of people that live in multifamily or apartment style housing. 90% of us live in single family homes. This is very unusual actually. The rest of the region, if you take a city like Singapore, it's like 95% multifamily housing. You take a city like Kuala Lumpur, it's about 60% multifamily housing. So we are just scratching the surface, and what you're seeing in Sri Lanka is this slow evolution and a transition from people kind of leaving single family home types of investments to multifamily home or condominium or apartment style housing, right? So that migration, you really start to see it happening. And that I think is one of the more interesting phenomena that you see in playing out in Sri Lanka at the moment.
Yeah, and in terms of that, I mean, those are the house buyers. As an investor who's coming in, if they are looking to build a portfolio, what type of investments do you recommend in the housing sector?
I'm going to answer depends to a lot
Yeah.
of your questions. Okay?
Yeah.
The reason is it also depends on what your investment time horizon is and what you're really looking for. So if somebody has a lot of holding power, like they can hold on to an asset for 10, 15, 20 years, they don't expect any cash to be generated from it, then land ends up being a fairly good investment, depending on the location. Okay, if you want to get some yield out of your investment in the form of rents, then you obviously will have to look at kind of built up housing, and in those your apartment types of developments will give you probably better yield than single family housing types of investments. But again, this depends on location. I mean, in a way, everybody says real estate is about location. In the heart of the city, you always have much higher rental potential. The further you go out from the core of the city, your rental potential kind of diminishes for obvious reasons. Because in the heart of the city, in the state, like in a place like Colombo, the heart of the city is where you have most of the jobs, most of the schools, most of the the desirable schools, if you will, most of the healthcare facilities, most of the entertainment. So even if people live in the burbs, they pretty much have to come into the city. So if you're in the city, you kind of have a leg up. You also have higher rental potential if you own property within the city.
Talking about that, now of course, in the heart of Colombo, because we were talking about Colombo, you see a lot of high-rises, luxury high-rises going up, and these are very expensive properties. These are comparable to, I think, developed countries, metropolitan area properties. So is there an oversupply of housing in that area?
No.
No.
Absolutely not. I think, again, I'll go back to this point I made earlier. Less than 10% of Colombo's population lives in multifamily housing. This is an anomaly for a capital city, right? Right now we have somewhere around 3,000 to 4,000 apartment units that are under construction in Colombo. This is really not a lot in the large scheme of things. And without Easter and the kind of pandemic now, we probably would have seen a lot more absorption. Obviously, we've seen a bit of an impact over the last year and a half or so. But historically, we've actually been doing quite okay. I'm not too worried about oversupply. Affordability, though, is a problem, right? A lot of what is being built in the city and around the city even is quite expensive, and there is a reason for that. The reason is construction costs in Sri Lanka are higher than the region because a lot of construction materials are taxed. Some of our regulations tend to be a little bit difficult, and because of that, our cost of construction here, cost of delivering something, is higher than, say, in Malaysia. Okay, and so there's a mismatch between that and affordability. And up till recently, we have had very, very limited housing mortgage take-up. I think if you rewind maybe a year ago and backwards, housing mortgages were kind of 4-5% of GDP, which is a very, very dismal percentage, really. But since interest rates have dropped, I think we are starting to see a surge in mortgages coming in, and that I think will help transform and help make it more affordable for people.
Now, of course, that is the positive outlook. Now, of course, you mentioned about the high cost of construction, which is somewhat of a weakness for the housing sector in Sri Lanka. What are some strengths in the urban planning and housing sector in Sri Lanka?
I think the strengths really are, this pent-up potential, this transformative potential. I mean, I firmly believe that within the next, 10, 15 years, we will see Colombo totally transformed, regardless of government, actually.
It's just the way forward.
It'll just transform simply because we're so far behind this multifamily housing adoption that it will inevitably happen. And number two, we have a city that has kind of expanded without its infrastructure expanding in tandem. which is why we were talking before the show about your commute in the morning, right? The commutes are debilitating at the moment. And that will be a phenomenon for the next 5, 6, 7 years at least. So, because of this, you are going to start to see people really gravitating towards the center of the city, into more communal types of housing, into apartment style housing, to be closer to where you are, right? Because an hour and a half a day coming in the morning, going back in the afternoon, it really adds up, By the time you retire, you would have spent, a decade in your car.
Yeah, it is something that is
and people don't really think about it, and people don't really think of the social cost of that as well. Of your kids carting them back and forth and so on. So that pressure in Sri Lanka is at a breaking point, and it is now changing the way people think, which is why you are seeing lots of new apartment developments, maybe not so much in the heart of the city because that still is quite expensive, but on the immediate fringe of the city, Nugegoda, Vallavata, Dehivala, these areas are really starting to, and that's the way of the future. So I think there's a huge opportunity in there, actually, for the buyer.
Of course, as an industry insider, you're here representing John Keel's Properties. Can you tell us a little bit about the company itself?
Yeah, so we obviously are one of the largest property developers in the country. I would say the largest. We've been the pioneer in the apartment housing space, and we've developed quite a few of the projects that you see in the city. But we've also got very, very ambitious view of what the city will become. And we like to see ourselves as trying to define that cutting edge of what urban living will be going forward. So we've got multiple projects in the market. You've heard of some of them, I'm sure. Cinnamon Life, Trizen. We've also got Victoria Golf and Country Resort in the market right now. It's completely different. But yeah, so we have very ambitious plans for Colombo going forward. And
I think the Cinnamon Life project is pretty interesting as well. It's a very large development. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, so Cinnamon Life is the largest single purely private sector investment in the country, right? It's massive. It's an 800-room hotel, 430 odd apartments, an office building with 250,000 square feet, a convention center. You name it, we've got a little bit of it in Cinnamon Life, and it's been a 6-7 year project, and we are really nearing the end. We're pretty much done with the office building, and we'll be kind of opening that in the next month or two. One of the residential towers is also, almost done, I think, within the next couple of weeks. And then, over the course of next year, we'll open up the rest of it. So I think the thinking behind Cinnamon Life was, how do you define what this city will be and define the image of the city? How can you create that one place where everybody that comes to Colombo takes a picture? And that I think will be Cinnamon Life.
Now, talking about that, now of course you are talking about development. How did the pandemic affect development for the company and the industry in general?
Yeah, so the pandemic has had impacts without a doubt. Of course, during that curfew period, all construction sites in the city shut down. But most of the sites are now up and running again. But the pandemic has had multiple impacts. One is managing the workforce and managing work on site with increased safety protocols is difficult. So it's affected speed of development. It's also affected global supply chains. When China had shutdowns, we couldn't get our stuff here. We've got, for example, light fixtures in Cinnamon Life, where one component is made in Belgium, another in Germany, another piece in somewhere else, and you can get 3 parts, but you can't get the 4th, so you can't get the fixture out. So global supply chains got impacted pretty badly, and of course labor availability got impacted pretty badly as well. But I think it's largely now getting kind of back to normal a little bit. The global logistics are working out okay now. We still have slack numbers. And we're trying to kind of get that organized, but I think we will only reach 100% normalcy when we have a vaccine or something of that nature, and when we can really go to full force.
Everybody has that.
Yeah, so there is an impact on speed, but I think we're managing it okay.
Now, of course, talking about the sector itself, what do you see as, now you talked a little bit about this, unexplored opportunities in the sector. You talked about, in terms of coming into the sector as a different business, a third-party business, what do you see as unexplored potential that they can actually trigger?
As a developer or as an
No,
individual looking at it?
as a, I think, an outside business. Now think about things like supers and all that stuff. Now we see a lot of apartments being sold, but post-sale care is not as great as the apartment itself. So are there potential to businesses to come in that way?
Sure. Yeah, I think the industry has a way to go, right? We are very nascent, if you will, because again, we have this dismal less than 10% of people. So we're kind of learning as we go, right? I think the kind of the entire real estate space will potentially get very professionalized over the next 5 to 10 years. One thing that will get professionalized, and I think it's improved over the years, and will continue to do so, is as you mentioned, management of apartments. I think there are now more global players now doing management of apartments, apartment complexes. It's still we still have growth pains because the legislation isn't quite there, so we struggle with it. But also just the entire kind of sale and resale market, the regulations associated with it, and making the entire market a little bit more transparent for people. I think that will evolve a lot as well. So will the rental market. The way the rental market is handled right now, if you look at Colombo proper, the rental market is very, very expat driven. And especially in the premium end, a lot of the apartments are expat driven. The rental pools, and I think that will slowly start to shift to a local market, and there's opportunities that come out for a whole new range of kind of real estate services there as well. So yeah, and then the other big area I think that I see a lot of opportunity is kind of transportation and transportation linked real estate. I think that's another kind of big opportunity.
Now, of course, we come to a tricky subject, the policies involved in real estate. It is always, I think, something of note. Thinking about the developments that are going on, you see a lot of people commenting on the land it's built in. This is built on marshy land. The construction is not up to code. What are the codes involved? What are the policies involved?
So I think the policy environment is a little fluid, but of course we have an established Colombo development plan that has its land use criteria defined. I think the problem partly has been with enforcing it. It's very difficult to be completely apolitical and enforce regulations in Sri Lanka. That is a key factor. But also, I think even the regulations can improve. I'll just give you a quick example. One of my pet peeves these days is parking regulations. You have an average apartment size of maybe 600, 700, 800 square feet. To park a car, it takes about 350 square feet. When you've got an affordability crisis, building parking is just an additional expense. Particularly in the center of the city where you really don't need a car because you're actually much better off taking an Uber or a Pick-me or a Tuk or something to get around. So I think there's evolution that's required in regulations to look at it very progressively and to see, look, what kind of regulation works in what locality and how do you stimulate investment through regulations. I think there's quite a bit of work to be done. We also need to look at, I think, from a regulatory perspective, how we are going to link Colombo with the suburbs, and what's the transportation infrastructure we put in.
I think that actually relates to how the city should evolve, right? The city planning and the urban planning.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that? How should we actually look towards the future?
I think we need to. My personal view is I think we need to embrace the fact that Colombo is going to continue to be the epicenter of Sri Lanka. I think first you just when you say, that's just reality. Then you need to plan for the growth of Colombo. And we need to arrest this pattern that we have of this kind of what is called suburban sprawl. Low density sprawling development that just goes further and further and further and further out of the city. Because the lower the density, the further out it goes, the more compounding the effects are on infrastructure and other services that we have to deal with. And then the more inconvenient and more kind of debilitating it is for the economy. Again, we talked about commutes. A 1.5 hour commute every day in the morning, another hour and a half in the afternoon. If you calculate, say, the productive time spent in traffic, that could be put to other productive use. It's a phenomenal number, actually. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in kind of improving connectivity within the city, but also embracing and enabling truly urban housing to happen within the city. And it's a cultural shift. Most of us, of course, our parents' generation more than us, are kind of grass under our feet. We must have grass under our feet. I don't think we're going to have that luxury in a few years.
Yeah.
And that's just a reality we have to face and then deal with it.
I think that's very important. And now, if there is a buyer, a budding entrepreneur, somebody who wants to invest, or a first-time house buyer out there, what are your advice to them?
First of all, be very, very careful about location. Promises of what a location will be are not the same as what a location is now. So be careful about location, because location at the end of the day is the most important factor in real estate. And again, my bias would be urban centers versus slightly periphery, simply because connectivity is not there yet. The second thing I would look for my second piece of advice would be wary of the credibility of who is actually doing what you're trying to do, because you're investing. People invest their life savings, right? So you just want to make sure in a very crowded marketplace that really look at stable developers with a track record. I think again that's something I would say. The third thing I would look at is why you really are investing. Do you really want to get yield out of it? And study what the market would be, what the rental potentials are before you put money down in something.
Some great advice to end this session. That was Mr. Nayana Mawilmada with us, the head of the property group at John Keells Holding. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And with that, we will be ending today's segment of Business Today.